Hey, what is going on, everybody? Today we're going to be taking a look at all of my relevant Doom Raid characters through each of the lanes now that I have put out some recently new videos on the individual Doom 2 raid lanes. Some have asked me how high I've built certain characters and which ones I recommend over others, who to level first, and what T4s I've put in them that allow me to clear all of Doom Raid 2 regular without too much trouble. I do want to say, even though this is aimed towards Doom Raid 2, that you can do exactly the same for Doom Raid 1 since they do share the same lanes, so a lot of the same characters will apply here. I also do want to say, on a whole, with perhaps a couple of exceptions, I think the average character needs to be closer to gear tier 15 to be safe. And I know this is a hard ask for some, but this is very hard content. Now, there are a handful of characters I use who are not at that point, but there is occasionally, some bad RNG, and obviously the higher you can take them, the better you can mitigate random disasters from happening to your team. We'll be going through all of this and more in today's video, so without further ado, let's get this show on the road. So we're going to start this video off with the order that they appear in the Doom Raid 2 left-hand side, because for me and my alliance, the way that we've been doing Doom Raid 2 has been going all on the left-hand side, which starts off Bio, Skill, Tech, Mystic, and Mutant. So we're going to be going through each of the rosters in that order because I think that makes the most sense, especially if you're trying to just get into Doom Raid 2. I think that's actually the easiest as well, because in my opinion, the Mutant lane for once is actually the hardest, in my opinion, in Doom Raid 2. So it's best to leave them to last, especially on the left-hand side, instead of doing them first, which is on the right-hand side. So, yeah, I mean, different alliances are going to have different things, but that's just how I felt has worked the best for us. But let's get started on the Symbiotes, who... wow, I honestly did not think that they were going to do as well as they do in Doom Raid 2, and actually they do it at a lower rate than what I'm at. So, my Symbiotes are currently level 84. I started doing this probably about level 82, whenever Doom Raid 2 launched, and I think I was level 82 anyways at that time, maybe 83. And my total team power for this is about 750k. That being said, my partner's Symbiotes account is about, I would say 630, 640, so this is via, and they can clear it just fine. So I would say that the average team for all of the lanes realistically should be around the 650k range if you want to play it safe. That kind of means that it's going to be a little bit easier for you to clear it at that point. Now, because a lot of these characters are older, especially Symbiote Spider-Man. Actually, Symbiote Spider-Man's really old, same with Carnage and Venom. But where I would put the most amount of power is kind of in the order of Symbiote Spider-Man, Anti-Venom, Scream, and then the other two, despite what my powers show. So for Symbiote Spider-Man, I would focus your main power on him. Try to make sure that he's the highest that he can get. Now, whether or not you want to use Raider or Skirmisher for your ISO is entirely up to you. If you're going for higher difficulty, you probably want to use Skirmisher because that gives you the plus 50% focus from green ISO 5, and that's pretty important. However, I'm only running base difficulty. I actually don't have any problems landing my debuffs with him, so I am running Raider for the extra damage, so I do prefer that personally. Now, as you can see, he is maxed out on his T4s because I think almost all of them are necessary for one reason or another. Obviously, I know my head's in the way here, you're gonna need that tier 5 passive, which gives you 20% max health for him and for all of his allies. The web slam, the ultimate, also really important. Getting that slow for 2 turns to all targets, super important for those debuffs. The special here, always apply bleed to each target. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but the guaranteed bleed actually increases the amount of damage overall that he does. And this is also really important for, for Doom Raid, because oftentimes you can time out. So you really need to maximize your damage. And actually, and the basic, of course, giving a defense down for 2 turns to secondary targets. So again, all of these things are really, really important, because I think we're getting to the point now, and maybe this is a topic of another video, that I think that more and more, if you want to perform at the very top end of the game, which now is Doom Raid 2, you kind of need to get 7775 for a lot of the newer characters. So for Scream, again, I have 7775. You don't have to do that. One thing that I would consider skipping maybe is the passive here for Scream, which gives you plus, I know it's hard to see, plus 5% healing. I can't scroll down far enough. It's plus 5% healing. I believe it's on death of any character. Heal all Symbiote allies for 10% if you have the T4s instead of 5%. This part might not be super necessary, but everything else, honestly, I think still is. Again, maybe I need to move myself to the other side of the screen because we're going to be talking about T4s a lot here. Alright, so I just moved myself just just for this, because we're going to be looking at T4s a lot here. So apply slow for 2 turns to primary and secondary target. Again, because of the debuffs, I think that's really important. The special, honestly, it's hard. You know, a lot of them really are. I think instead of telling you what is important for the T4s, I think it's better to tell you what you don't really need. And so in terms of that, you know, honestly, I think most of these are, you know, a guaranteed bleed. All of this really contributes to the damage that's done. And if you don't want to time out, a lot of these are really important. Same with Anti-Venom. I honestly think that for the most part, all 4 of his skills are really necessary to have T4. But I will tell you, of the Symbiotes who I think aren't really that necessary for Venom, I actually only have 1, and even then you don't necessarily need to have his basic. The reason why is because I use the basic quite frequently over some of the other skills, because a lot of times for Venom you do want to hold the skills just to kind of use them at certain points in time, which are better than others. So the special and the ultimate are really conditional, right, depending on what you want to do. If you want to spread those debuffs, if you want to apply an ability block, which sometimes is very important, whether you're in Doom Raid 1 or 2, really important to do. So sometimes I just default to the basic because that's just kind of saving my other skills, and having that extra 50% damage, you know, helps. Obviously that part's not necessary, and Venom is one of the few characters. I think some of the older characters you can get away with not having a T4 everything, but some of the newer characters, almost you always need a lot of them. So I almost think that for Symbiote, Spider-Man, Scream, and Anti-Venom, you're kind of stuck in, for the most part, T4ing a lot of these characters. Now Carnage, I do have 2 things. Obviously, the T4 on the passive, super important because you're filling speed bar from 20% to 30%. This is super important, whether it's in Doom Raid 1 or Doom Raid 2. Getting that extra speed bar for Doom Raid 1, you're taking advantage of Greg. I don't remember if Doom Raid 2 has one or not. I'd have to go back and check. Either way, it's still a super important passive for as long as we're using Carnage. The basic, now you're using the basic quite frequently because you don't often use the special unless there's a lot of debuffs stacked. So you're either using your ultimate or you're using the basic because you're wanting to spread debuffs. So even though the 50% damage might not sound like a lot, it does add up when you're doing it quite frequently like I do, and so that damage does help. That's probably one of the only other T4s I'd really add to Carnage. I don't think they're super necessary on some of the others. You know, piercing is obviously great, but I mean, for how long the cooldown is, the basic is something that you're going to be using more frequently. So that's the Symbiotes there. Let's move on to the skill team now. Alright, so this is my skill roster, and I will have to say the main ones, if you guys have watched any of my videos on the skill lane, which I released recently, mostly I'm using characters like Cap Sam, Sharon Carter, Maria Hill of the Secret Avengers. These are some of the most important characters, and honestly, I wouldn't walk in to Doom Raid 2 without having them built up, because I just don't think it's worth blue ISOing some of the others. On top of those 3, though, I am actually obviously I'm using Kestrel. Kestrel is everywhere. As my 5th, I am using Moondragon, and I do use her in my gameplay video, if you guys have watched that. Shang-Chi is also an acceptable 5th member as well. I don't think Gamora is all that useful anymore. I did use her in Doom Raid 1, but in Doom Raid 2, she just doesn't do enough kind of extra stuff. She's really good in her damage, but I think that in terms of what you need is not necessarily just damage, because a lot of that can already be fulfilled through Kestrel. You know, hell, even Sharon Carter and Cap Sam actually hit pretty hard on their skills. So let's go through the Secret Avengers first. We're going to start with Sharon Carter. Obviously, the 2 that you need the most, I think, is going to be the ultimate and the special. So this one here is clear all positive effects. This is super, super helpful, both in Doom Raid 1 and 2, actually against the Ebony Maw in Doom Raid 1. Doom Raid 2, there's some very special characters. I think there's also an Ebony Maw actually on the boss node in Doom Raid 2 skill. Super important here, and it does a lot of extra damage, and it stuns, which that happens without the 2 T4s, but still really, really important. Close combat or special, also super important because it applies the ability block to primary targets for 2 turns, and when you're on the boss fight, fighting Dr. Doom, this is essential to getting him ability blocked and making sure that he's stuck that way for 2 turns, because in Doom Raid 2, unlike Doom Raid 1, the Doom Raid 2 version of Dr. Doom, he does get the passive, which gives him 50% turn bar and an ability energy. I don't believe that does happen in Doom Raid 1. So this 2 turns rather than 1 turn, super important, and one of the few characters that can actually apply ability block. The only other way around this really would be Moondragon's special, but again, this does not ability block, so eventually that Doom is going to get there to his turn, so that's not good. Her special, her passive, I'm not sure if you actually need the 80% focus with Deflect. Maybe this is more of a deal in the harder difficulties, but at least for Doom Raid 2.0, I don't think you really need this. I don't have it, and I'm doing just fine clearing all of that. The basic, also just damage, so you don't really need that. Moving on to Cap Sam, he is someone kind of like the Symbiotes. I would T4 everything. He has a lot of very good skills from his ultimate, just everything. I think we're just gonna end it at everything, because even the passive, it adds up. Lots of extra block amount and max health. I just think at this point you need to max cap Sam. He is amazing. Whether or not you use him as a skirmisher or as a striker like I do, entirely up to you if you want the focus or not for his basic and also the follow-up attack. Careful if you're using too many strikers but you don't actually have any characters to apply it. So that's why I use Sharon Carter as a skirmisher, just to kind of clarify that in case people were wondering. Mostly because I just need people to apply that. Now I have Raider on Kestrel, so that helps as well. Maria Hill, I also have her as a healer. I do find that when I use her ultimate, she cleanses all the debuffs, and that really helps. And with the blue healer ISO, she heals up quite a bit. Now I have 3 T4s. I think that the passive is really important when it comes to raids, because you get plus 15% healing when they block, and that actually goes up from 10% to 25%, which is quite frequently. And the ultimate, of course, cleanses all negative effects from Self, Avenger, and skill allies. Very, very important. The damage is just an added bonus, but really this goes from, I think, cleansing only 2 negative stats effects to everything, so that's also really important. The special, I think, for the summons is also really important. It doesn't increase the amount of damage, she's not there for the damage, but it's the guaranteed 3 shield troopers, because the shield troopers help to ping Kestrel's defense downs, and that adds more damage from Kestrel's passive. So I think in the long term, very important skill to have. Then we're going to talk about Kestrel. So Kestrel, no-brainer. Actually, you know what? I'm barely going to talk about it. Max everything, because she's amazing. And unfortunately, that's, again, where we're at, is that you kind of need to max everything for a lot of the newer characters, especially the really good ones. Whether or not you want to use her as a raider or a striker, I have talked about this from time to time before. I use her as a raider because of the pings on the passive, that the higher extra crit damage really helps me get through the, at least, Doom Raid 2.0. I can't speak to higher difficulties. You know, you're going to have to find a more Whale or Kraken CC other than myself in order to get you better information on those higher difficulties, but this is what works for me. Now, finally, we're going to end with Moondragon. I don't have Shang-Chi built that high, but if you do want to build him, you're probably going to need, I think, the ultimate and the passive. The ultimate reduces more turn bar, does a lot of increased damage as well, and he does cleanse, actually, as well. This stuff, not so much. I don't think you need that, but he does help to cleanse, does a little bit of support with a little bit extra damage. Moondragon, I think, is kind of the safer route, because I think that if you want to keep your characters alive a lot better, it's a lot easier that way. That being said, what you're going to want is probably going to be the ultimate for the increased healing, and the special, which will then knock back the turn bar an extra 20% as well. I don't think you actually need the passive, because a lot of that actually relates to Infinity Watch, so whether or not you're using them in Arena or not, it's entirely up to you to get that. That's probably all you need there, and once again, I recommend the healer ISO. So that's all I can say about the skill. Let's jump on over to tech, where things are going to get a bit more hard. Okay, so here we are in the tech roster. Now, I'm only going to be talking about the characters that I'm actually using in Doom Raid tech, and that's going to be Dr. Doom, Doc Ock, Nebula, Shuri, and Kestrel. We're not going to be discussing Ghost, Minerva, or Ultron, or Lady Deathstrike at this point. There might be some validity to Lady Deathstrike, but in terms of the long term, I think people should be wholly, and we'll be discussing that in this completely separate video. So again, we don't need to go over Kestrel. We already talked about her in skill. Max everything. Dr. Doom, max everything. You know, you're going to be using him again in Mystic anyways. Max everything. Very easy thing to do. Probably want to keep him as a striker, though, because I think he does take advantage of the vulnerabilities quite well, and he does a lot of bit of extra damage there. Doc Ock, I personally prefer him as a healer. A lot of people who are using him in war-related stuff also use him as a healer. The blue healer ISO-1 is pretty nice anyways, and you're going to want him to... You kind of want all the characters, the blue ISO-2 eventually, even if you're just doing the base difficulty, because that extra 10% hit points helps a lot. Now, in terms of Doc Ock's T4s, if you're using them specifically for raids, you actually only need about, like, the special, and the reason why you need the special is not because of the 3 charges that it applies, but actually because it gives Shocker 7775 on his skills. That's really important as well. The ultimate is actually just damage, so it's not super important if you're using him in Doom Raid. However, you know, he doesn't actually do a terrible amount of damage, and sometimes every little bit of extra damage helps. The passive is only a war thing, so you don't actually need this either. And the basic, I believe, is also damage, so you don't need that either. I would just say the special, realistically. And if you want to go a little bit further, then you can take the ultimate for damage, which he does use semi-frequently. So that's entirely up to you. Easy one there. Shuri. Now, this is an interesting one. Very old character. I do have a 7 red Shuri, though, and that obviously does help me. but I do think that she's really important because of her special giving early defense up at the start of the match, and a little bit of ability energy as well. But getting that early defense up is super important for a team that doesn't really have a ton of mitigation or a ton of negative status effects. There's no real way to apply offense down to the enemies, so I think that this is really important. I did recently pick up the passive here, the T4 Wakanda Forever, because that gives her an extra 20% max health. Now, it's just her, unfortunately, because we're not using the rest of the Wakandans, right? So I think it's because her base stats are actually quite low comparatively, even with a 7 red comparatively to some of the newer characters. I really needed to boost up that hit points a little bit up for her survivability. Secondarily, you could pick up Kimoyo healing, her ultimate healing. It repeats 4 times instead of 3. I could find this pretty useful as well. I haven't hit that yet. I'm clearing it currently with what I have, so I'm not sure I want to spend this because I'm kind of thinking that there's going to be some other tech characters coming out soon. Whether or not they're a support, I don't know, but I'm not sure who they're going to replace. That's why I don't want to overinvest in any of these tech characters besides the gold that I'm spending on the levels. So Nebula here, obviously because of Infinity Watch, I have put T4s into everything here. Some of the ones that I would personally recommend is the passive, though, because that'll give you extra assist chance. Even outside of the Infinity Watch team, you are going to get about a 20% assist chance to everyone else on the team, even just using her. Now, we're not going to talk about Lady Deathstrike in this video because I think we're going to be doing this in a separate video. These are all of the 5 characters here, so let's jump on over to Mystic. Okay, so this one's a little bit of a no-brainer, but there are quite a few options in terms of characters that you can use for this. But we're going to talk about the characters that I specifically use for this, and this is going to be Cloak and Dagger, which are the recently new warriors, including Deathpool, actually, all 3 of them. Deathpool, Cloak and Dagger, Dr. Doom, and Silver Surfer. So I don't actually use Adam Warlock. So even though he is a hero mystic, some people may use him, and frankly, if you are using him, you probably want to max him out anyways because of Arena. So we'll just say if you are using Adam Warlock, max him out because that makes the most sense. However, we're going to talk about the 5 characters that I use. Dr. Doom, we already talked about him in tech, so max him out. That's fine there. We'll talk about Silver Surfer because he's the non-new warrior. Again, I don't know if you need to max him out anymore. However, he is still a pretty strong character. There is a few that I would probably personally recommend. I believe it's this one. Yes, the ultimate, plus 50% piercing to all enemies, clear immunity from all enemies, and apply heal block for 2 turns. The passive, pretty important too. Lower resistance by 50% for all enemies with heal block. That's pretty important. The special, disrupted to the primary target for 2 turns. I'm not sure if this is important from a perspective of Doom Raid, but it does do a lot of extra damage. 100% extra piercing to the primary and 50% to the secondary on a cooldown of 5, and given his speed, this actually happens pretty quickly. You know what? Actually, you're probably just going to want to max him out as well. So this is what I'm talking about, though, is that to really be competitive in Doom Raid 2, even in Doom Raid 1, a lot of these newer characters really need to be maxed out to fulfill their potential. But not every single character. Some of them who just have straight up damage on their T4s, not super necessary. This is what I currently have on my Deathpool. 142k, 5 yellow, 5 red. I have the passive. They've really improved the passive since they reworked her, they fixed their bugs on her. Even though it's only 60% damage to the most injured enemy, that really adds up when actually you start killing a lot of enemies, and that extra damage that she does now. And she can actually hit multiple targets, so that's the part that they fixed. Before this, she would only target, like, let's say you killed 3 people, she would only hit that same target 3 times. But now, actually, if someone dies after the 2nd hit, she'll go and target someone else on that 3rd hit, and that really helps, in my opinion. So I do like that, despite being just damage. Now, the ultimate I also have as well. Apply 2 bleed for 2 turns to the primary target, plus 100% damage to the primary target. Some people do or don't pick this up. It's really up to you. And the special here, transfer all negative effects from this target to the primary target. They also fixed this a little bit as well. So even if you do kill the character, I'm pretty sure it still transfers the negative effects. I think that was what was changed. So yeah, she's probably another character that you could also max out quite comfortably. All the T4s, I think they're pretty good, and probably something that I will work on soon. I do have actually a fair bit of T4s. I'm just being a little bit conservative. I always try to wait until that next patch to see what's coming around the corner. Now for Cloak and Dagger, clearly, I think it's the passive and the ultimate on both cases. The Dark Force Conduit, pretty good, that extra focus and the additional dodge chance for himself. And then the ultimate, these things get spammed quite frequently. The more kills you rack up, and it does a lot of extra damage. Even though it's just damage, it does a lot of it, and honestly, that's why I would do it. Despite some of these also being pretty decent, 100% extra damage, but also on a cooldown of 3, applying slow defense down and offense down for 2 turns instead of 1 turn is also pretty good. That's probably something that I will pick up later as well. Dagger, same kind of deal. Passive, ultimate, on spawn, apply 3 regen for 2 turns to self and all mystic heroes instead of just 2, I believe it's 2, from 2 to 3. So that helps your longevity going from node to node in the beginning, and resistance for the whole team. Now, the ultimate, again, I think it's just damage, but once again, this gets spammed quite a bit. Not as frequently as Cloak's, because Cloak has it at the start of the battle, more or less. Dagger does not, and you have to wait till turn 2. But once you start killing people, like, en masse, like with Cloak and Dagger's ultimate combined, it's just like the whole field gets wiped off. Whether you're in Doom Raid 1 or Doom Raid 2, this is really, really helpful. So I would invest in this extra damage, because they actually surprisingly do a lot of damage. I do use a Raider with Dagger because of her AoE abilities and all of her multi-hit attacks, that she does actually do a fair bit of damage despite being a support character. Cloak because I want to be more guaranteed of the negative status effects that I do give him, the Skirmisher. And for Silver Surfer, getting the Striker ISO, Doom obviously the Striker ISO, and for me, Deathpool, I use the Raider one. Now, some people use Striker for Deathpool, but I personally use Raider. So that's my lineup for the Mystic roster. Finally, we're going to end things off here in the Mutant roster. Now, this is obvious that we're going to be using the Astonishing X-Men, and we're not going to be touching any of the Weapon X characters because they just don't fit in very well. This will be, again, subject of a different video, but this one's pretty obvious. Jubilee, Beast, Bishop, Iceman, and Kitty Pryde. And actually, I would level them and gear them in that order here because I think that makes the most sense. So starting off with Jubilee, honestly, I would max her, but whether or not you want to or not is entirely up to you. I just think it helps personally. There's a lot of good reasons to have each of the skills personally, and I use her as a striker. Now, people are going to be a bit contentious about my ISO combination of characters here on my Astonishing X-Men. I don't think that I don't think Jubilee runs into any resistance problems here in Doom Raid 2, but possibly if you go up into the higher difficulties, you might want to switch her to Skirmisher for that 50% focus. I personally haven't had a lot of issues, and I like that follow-up attack to get that blind off on her Striker attack. Now, for Beast, I am also running the Blue Healer ISO. Some people also think that you should be running him as a Skirmisher to help on his basic, to help flip those positive status effects. I haven't had a ton of issue myself, but I also haven't built up to gear tier 15, and I have about 140k, and so that really helps. But otherwise, if you're having troubles flipping those positive status effects with his basic, I would definitely recommend doing the Skirmisher on that if you so choose. But I do like the survivability aspect of having the healer ISOs on this one. But the only T4 I think that's really required is the special on Beast, because this does clear 2 negative status effects instead of 1 to 2. This is guaranteed to 2. This doesn't sound like a lot, but actually it does save me and has saved me on plenty of occasions. Bishop, he's going to be next up. He also runs the Skirmisher ISO. A lot of people prefer the Striker ISO, just to give him extra damage on his skills, on all of his skills and his counterattacks. The reason why I like this is because of positive status effect removal, because everyone has Skirmisher on my team other than Jubilee, who is being set up for her Striker attack, and I personally like that. I could probably use a couple more T4s, but I do think that the ultimate is one of the better ones, obviously because he has a 2 ability cooldown on his ultimate, 60% if he's not charged, 120% when he is charged extra damage, which happens, he's almost charged like almost all the time whenever he gets hit. I could maybe consider getting the passive, more counterattack, and 10% damage reduction when he has the taunt. Every time he gets hit, he loses the taunt, I believe, anyways, but that might help every now and then. I'm being really conservative on my T4, so this is what I have right now. This gets me through the nodes. Admittedly, Mutant is one of the harder ones in my opinion, though. Let's talk about Iceman, and I think the only one that's really required, that's mandatory, is his passive. This is super important. Not only does it do extra piercing damage on enemy turn, but it reduces the amount of armor and damage done by the enemies by 10% when they have slow, which is almost all the time. Whether you're using Iceman or whether you're using Jubilee to apply that slow, they're going to have slow almost all the time, and that extra 10% damage reduction is super important. So that's the only main one. If you do want to get another one, you could get Ice Slide, I suppose. It does a decent amount of damage, but otherwise I don't think it's super necessary. As you can see by the power of my Iceman, he is the 4th character on my list in terms of power. Now, Kitty Pryde, overall, 94k. She is the last one on the list because I don't have enough ISO. Sorry, I don't have enough miasma to get her to gear tier 14. I am just barely sliding through the mutant lane. Admittedly, I really do need to get her up to gear tier 14 or higher. I just don't have the miasma to do that. But in terms of T4 priority, you're going to want to get that passive here because it always applies evade to the most injured astonishing X-Men, and that is really important. That's the in raids here part. Here on enemy turn, apply evade to the most injured astonishing X-Men ally or self. So it's on enemy turn, not your turn or anything like that. So this applies very frequently, and it allows for a lot of your characters to survive. And unfortunately, you know, I've been trying to see if there's a way to get rid of Kitty Pryde, but I just don't think that that's happening. I've seen some gameplay videos of Omega Red, and from what I understand, Kitty Pryde is here to stay. So yeah, you're gonna need to build her, but unfortunately, in terms of miasma, she is kind of last on the list for me. And why we go on the left hand side for Doom Raid 2, because that's the last lane is the mutant lane, and I don't really want to build her, and I'm just hoping that there's some alternative, but I don't think that there's going to be. Anyways, let's very quickly round it off with my total team power for the end of the video. Alright, and to start things off here with the bio lane at the start here, we have a 781k Symbiotes team. You guys saw my individual power. Obviously, the highest character that I have is Symbiote Spider-Man. And Scream, secondly, I think that might be due to Red Stars and T4s, with Anti-Venom coming up third, and then Carnage and Venom fourth and fifth. This is how it is for my bio. I think you need about 658k to comfortably clear a Doom Raid 2.0, and if you want to do Doom Raid 1, I think you need about 500k, 550k, but don't quote me on that if you want to have a comfortable time on that. And coming in hot with the skill lane here is my 688k Secret Avengers, Kestrel, and Moondragon here. Again, I think I'm just at the point now, since I added Maria Hill to about gear tier 15, this has really helped me be able to clear the skill lane no problem. I would still say about 650k would be safe if you want to avoid any disastrous RNG. I think that's probably where you're going to want to take them. Okay, coming in third is my tech team here. Now, they are a little bit higher. They're actually close to 800k, and the reason why this is because they're kind of a selection of, you know, individually handpicked characters that I just happen to have at a high power. I actually think that for the tech lane, this is still not the best lineup, obviously, because they don't have any team synergy. They're just a handful of good characters combined. So here, the way that I line up my characters is with Doc Ock in the middle, just so that they can give deflect to Shuri and Nebula, who actually have the kind of the most squishiest, I would say, out of the 5 characters here, and with Kestrel and Dr. Doom on the side. So in terms of importance, I would really put it at Doom and Kestrel. They're doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. Doc Ock third, and then the rest is what it is. I'm hoping that there's better tech characters to come in the patches ahead, because we really need some synergy, some better synergy, I think. However we get that, this is my tech lineup here. Now, this is my Mystic lane here. Your arrangement of characters might vary. The reason why I have Dagger next to Deathpool and Cloak is because on Dagger's turn, she gives offense up to her adjacent allies. Now, you may want to do this with, you know, Silver Surfer. That's entirely up to you, but this is just how I arrange my characters right now. We're at about a comfortable 690k, and once again, I think I'm kind of at the point where I can clear it, barring some really bad RNG. Obviously, the higher team power, the better, so keep pushing that level 85 on some of the more important characters, and that will help you get through, whether you're on Doom Raid 1 or Doom Raid 2, and that's kind of where I'm at right now, being able to clear the existing content. So I hope that this helps here. And finally, rounding off this video is my Astonishing X-Men for the Mutant lane. This is actually my lowest team, I think, at 633k. I'm actually not at the 650 that I recommend for most of the teams, and this is probably why I struggle the most in terms of this lane. Now, where I could make up the power, obviously, is going to be Iceman. I don't think he's tier 15. Actually, I'm not entirely sure. I know Kitty's not, because we talked about this. So Kitty's at tier 13. I could definitely get her up to tier 15 at some point, but the miasma, man, the miasma crunch. Anyways, this is the lineup, actually. I would probably recommend Iceman being behind Bishop instead of Beast. Other than that, though, I think that there's not too much that I can do about this, and I will just have to raise their level. I'll have to, you know, do the best I can and hope for that more miasma for my Kitty Pryde to get through, to get the higher power. We do this lane last, and honestly, like, clearing one node is fine, because at that point I'm just looking to hit 30% at this point. And hopefully as new characters come out, we can kind of build them up more. I honestly think that the mutants might see another team in the near future, at least by the new year, maybe, once we get some replacements for tech. I honestly think that we might see a mutant replacement before bio, but hey, that's just me. Anyways, that's the end of this video, guys. That is me and all of my teams here for the Doom Raid 2. I really hope that this helps. Also, you can use a lot of what I said for Doom Raid 1 if that is where you're at as well. But hope this kind of gives you a baseline of what to expect right now for Doom Raid 2. Obviously, as characters become available, we'll be discussing those and where they slot into Doom Raid 2 progression. But that's just it for just now. So if you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. And until next time, stay safe and healthy, and I'll see y'all later. Boilon signing out.